King on Twitter/X. And he's a developer advocate at Treblle, a company that helps teams build and maintain APIs. Steve was supposed to be with us in Brighton tonight, but unfortunately, due to train strikes, he could not make it. He managed to make it to Cardiff and then had to turn back, unfortunately. So he's going to be giving his presentation remotely this day. And tonight, Steve is going to show us how to build a performance API with Laravel, sharing some design best practices and some things along the way. Before we do that, though, first a reminder that the event is being recorded. So if you do not want to be filmed or photographed, please let us know. And then before we get started, Charlie is going to tell us a few words about Silicon Brighton, and Vi is going to tell us a few words about Runway East, who kindly support this meetup tonight. You want to go first, Vi?
Hi, everyone. So Runway East is a co-working space. We're based everywhere around the UK. We now have about 8 locations. And if you'd like to have a tour after the event, I can give you a little tour. It's pretty much what you see here. There's loads of offices. There's offices for one person and ranging up to 30 people offices here. Yeah, if you have any questions, you can just come up. And if you'd like to book or call for renting an office here, there's information on the table. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. And my name's Charlie. It's nice to see all of you guys. I work in events and community engagement for Silicon Brighton, and we are the hosts of Brighton and Hove's tech sector. We support over 30 different meetup groups here across the city, all of which you can see on screen now, in different parts of the tech community across the city. And all of our events are free to join, available to people at all levels, and hybrid. So for those of us who are there in the room today, and for those of us who are watching online, and we post a video of the event afterwards for you to watch back if you would like to as well. All of the work that we do is possible with the help of our supporters, all of whom you can see on screen here. We owe them a huge amount of thanks. And we are looking for more help and more support, and we need you. Maybe you can help us by being a supporter or by talking to the company that you're working for at the moment, or you can come and volunteer at one of our events or help organize one of the meetups, or if you'd like to come and do a talk at one of our meetup groups. Any kind of help that you might be interested in providing will be hugely appreciated. These are our values. I'll let you read through these whilst I'm talking, but we look to uphold these in all of the work that we do. And if you feel at any point that these aren't being upheld, please do just come and talk to myself or Steve, who's also here from Silicon Brighton tonight. And you can follow us on socials. We're on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter/X, and TikTok, all at Silicon Brighton. And you've caught us in a really fantastic time where we're really, really busy throughout May. We've got events every week, but we're also partnering with Brighton Fringe for the first time this year, which is fantastic. If you scan this QR code, it will take you to the Fringe website where you can browse. I saw today over 700 events throughout May. And if you use the discount code Silicon full caps there, you'll get a little bit off when you check out of any of your events that you're going to. All of our events that we are doing this month are listed on the Fringe websites. A lot of them are also having Fringe acts come through to do a preview of their show. It's a fantastic partnership. We're really, really pleased and excited to be doing it. And I would just strongly recommend going to any weird and wonderful Fringe events that you can throughout May, because it's just so much fun. Like I say, we've got a lot of stuff going on. Tomorrow night, we've got 2 events, Brighton Pie and JavaScript, so you can do the double if you fancy it. And then next week on Tuesday, we're doing a collaboration between Sussex is Yours user group and Brighton AI over at Platform 9 in Hove. And then on Wednesday, we're premiering a new meetup group called Breaking Breadboards, which is for tech hardware, which we're really excited about to be launching this new group with the organisers there. So if you're around, please come on through. That's at Eagle Labs just around the corner on Preston Circus. If you want to come to any of those, scan the QR code there or head to siliconbrighton.com/events. And please also consider joining our Slack community if you've not done so already. It's a fantastic place to talk with the community and with everybody who's a part of the Silicon Brighton group, and to showcase all the work that you're doing, to find out about other events that are going on around the city. So that is everything from me. I'm going to pass back to Yannick. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.
All right, I think we're gonna get Steve in a minute. Is he gonna like appear on the screen?
I'm here.
Hey,
Hey, thank you for having me. And I apologize about the train strikes.
it's quite all right. It's a bit of a shame, but what can you do, right? So yeah, welcome. Thank you for doing this. Before we get started with your talk, I would like to ask you, I think I'm gonna look at the camera, so it looks like I'm actually talking to you instead of looking at the screen, so it'd be weird. Yeah, I would like to ask you a couple of questions before we get started, and especially about your job, because I think it's a job that probably not that many people are familiar with. So like I said earlier, you are a developer advocate at Treblle. And so I guess as first question, could you just tell us basically what it is that a developer advocate does?
So basically, my job is to advocate for the company that I work for in developer communities. And in our case, we build API products. So I just talk about APIs and how I use our products at work to help me build better APIs.
Right.
It's a dream job, basically. I get to just talk APIs all day, play with APIs all day.
Sounds great. Sounds amazing. Yeah, and I guess it's a way also to like bring on board like more and more developers. Maybe it's like a way to communicate more directly to the tech people instead of just, you know, like the, I don't know, marketing people or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of assuming that's like a very efficient way of doing it. So actually, just a quick question in the audience, quick show of hand. Does anybody have a developer advocate in their company? Yeah, no, nobody. Yeah, I really don't think that's a very common job yet, but I think it's probably one with a bright future. As part of the job, you obviously put a lot of content out there. And that's also something you were doing before Treblle, because I mean, you've got a blog, you've got a YouTube channel. I think you write articles for PHP Architect as well, and so on and so forth. Like you really do a lot. So my second question, and it's probably something you get quite a lot. Where does the inspiration for all of these content, all of these topics, like where does it come from? Like what's your secret?
As a developer advocate, I get to kind of play a lot. I get to come up with random ideas and see how they might work. And if I kind of run into either something interesting or something maybe a little bit difficult, I'll create some content on it. So, headers in a Laravel application, for example, when you're building an API, what are the right headers to use for an API? I do it all the time, but there's nothing out there that says these are the headers that you should probably use when you build an API. There's no guidebook or rule book on this is what you should be doing. So I try to, from my experience and the advice that I can give, I create some content on it.
Yeah, so basically try to do things, and if you it turns out it's hard to find some content in there. So that's probably something you can write or talk about. Okay, I think that's a great tip for anybody who maybe would like to share more content, but doesn't necessarily know where to start, basically, right?
Yeah.
Cool, awesome. Thank you for your answers, but I'm gonna let you get on with your talk now. So yeah, without any further ado, please welcome Steve for his talk, Dive into Performant API using Laravel's built-in tools.
Thank you very much. Is my screen sharing still? Yes. Right, so I'm going to apologize that I'm not there in person. I really wanted to be. I got all the way to Cardiff and couldn't get any further. So today we're going to talk about diving into performant APIs using Laravel's built-in tools. And I am testing out my cool new gadget that lets me swap slides. So who am I? As you've already heard, I'm a developer advocate at Treblle. And what Treblle do is we build developer tools to enrich the API ecosystem. I live stream a lot on YouTube. And if you recognize this view, this angle, probably this jacket, you've probably watched one of my live streams before. I also write for PHP Architect. I started that probably about 5 or 6 months ago after speaking to Eric, and I started off doing the artisan column, the Laravel artisan way column, and then I said, can I just do an API column because I could probably get more content. And I'm a conference speaker because part of my job as a developer advocate is to speak at conferences. But before, as a developer advocate, I was throwing CFPs everywhere trying to speak because I enjoy passing on what I know to other people. I'm a huge open source advocate. If you can open source it without risking any sort of insider information about your business, there's no harm in doing so. And I 100% think more people should be doing it. I'm also a father and a husband, and quite clearly a bearded guy. And when I say father, I mean I'm repopulating Wales. I've got more kids than I can remember how to count. So usually this is the part where I would take a selfie. So when I'm in person, I like to take a selfie with everyone. Obviously, I can't do that right now. So Yannick said he would take a picture, and everyone who doesn't want to be in the picture, hide your face. Otherwise, say cheese. I don't know if he actually took that picture, but we're going to carry on anyway. And yes, these are all images generated by ChatGPT with a Star Trek theme because I'm an absolute Star Trek nerd. Companies either have an API, need an API, or integrate with an API these days. And building a good API is a lot more than just modeling your data, throwing some kind of JSON accessors and controllers around them, calling it a CRUD API, and being done with it. You've got to think a little bit past that for people to enjoy using your API. So what I like to do is talk about and Laravel has got a really rich package ecosystem. Like, you name it, if you need something in your Laravel application, you can find it. And mostly it's created by Sparsy, but sometimes it's not. So Laravel's got some core packages, which are first-party packages, which are really, really good. So you've got Laravel Sanctum, which is amazing for when you need a kind of token-based auth. Think JWT, but without the stigma of local storage. Then you've got Laravel Passport for those beefy OAuth 2 servers that you might want to create. You've got Laravel Octane for when you want to take PHP and slap some nitrous in it and see how fast it can go. Then you've got Laravel Horizon, which is a fantastic way to monitor your queues. Oh, went too far. Oh, come on, sorry. I'm inexperienced with this clicker. It didn't come with an L plate. So, and the reason I'm mentioning these packages in particular is because I think they highlight really well what you should be thinking about when you're building your API. You should be thinking about ease of authentication, performance and speed, and horizon. You want to see what can you push to a background job that you don't that you don't need that instantaneous response, what you can move to an asynchronous queue worker. And that's why I always mention these 4 packages. They're a way to get your API from relatively good to, wow, that's fast, it responds well, and I can authenticate easily. But managing performance and scalability in an API is more than just, is it fast and can I chuck stuff into the background? It's about how you can scale the performance of your code base as well as the API itself. When you talk about scalability, you typically think, oh, I'll just throw a Kubernetes cluster at it, or I'll go serverless and I can scale horizontally and vertically and no one ever needs to worry. But also you've got to think about the developer scalability. And what that means is that if you hired 2 new developers today, how easy would it be for you to scale efficiency on building features for that API? So you got to kind of think about not just how fast can I make it, but how well can I maintain it? Oh, sorry, I'm going to have a quick drink. That Chinese is trying to get me. So, what are we here for? We're here for code, right? What we all like to do. So, breaking my slides. Oh, now I've lost my screens. There we go. I've got too many screens. There we go. So, I have built a very basic to-do application. And I know, that sounds like a bit of a cop-out. Another to-do app. But I think what it does, it gives us a really interesting starting point for our APIs. And if I just pick this up a minute and we're going to zoom in, or try and zoom in. If we just do a quick list, you see I've got a lot of front-end stuff at the moment. Obviously, this is using Laravel Jetstream. Straightforward. I can create API tokens, and it's just no muss, no fuss. And if we scroll up, we've got 2 endpoints at the moment. We've got a ping endpoint and a user endpoint. So they're 2 endpoints that you'd typically find in an application. You'd have the user, so you can get the authenticated user. Then ping is more for that kind of, is my service online? Now, I'm not going to go through those because I think that's a bit boring. But I have set up this project on Treblle. And what I can do is I can turn real time on. And as we make requests, they'll start appearing within here. And I can see the load time, response size, and start to get an insight into, is my API going in the right direction? And the marketing team would kill me for saying this, but I absolutely love using Treblle for development because it tells me, oh, I forgot to add those headers. Oh, my response size is getting big. Maybe I should look at how I'm including relationships or filtering information, or my data size. What can I do there? But this application is relatively simple. It's got, wow, that looks absolutely terrible. Let me reload this from disk and see if it sorts itself out. It doesn't. Okay, we'll do it this way. So these are our models. We've got a comment model, a label, project activity, section, task, and user. And the idea here is that a user will create their project, they'll create sections, and they'll start adding tasks to it. They'll label their tasks. They might comment on those tasks. And the project activity is just there to catch anything that might be going on in the background. So first off, you'll notice down the side here, I have got slightly different setup for my routes. I like to embed them a little bit because if you just include it all there, it starts to get really messy. So here is a basic routes file of what we need to get started. And that works really nicely. But I'm going to want to start adding more things in here. I'm going to want to start saying, I want to get the registered users routes. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to do a get request to projects. I'm just going to give that a name of projects for now. And I'll include a controller. And that'd be fantastic. But before you know it, you've got 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 endpoints all mashed in this one root file. And it gets so busy that it's just hard to work with. And when you start with if you're onboarding into a new application, and typically what I would do is I'd go to the roots file to try and understand, okay, so how is this set up? I open it up, and if I've got to scroll a lot, then I'm going to start getting worried. So what I like to do is inside API here, I like to create a resource-based root file. So I can say declare script types. I'm going to use a root facade. And within here, this is where I'm going to say, I'm going to do a get request. I'm going to say name, and we're going to call this one index. Now, this is where our projects are going to be. So down here, instead of doing it this way, I can say, okay, I want to prefix all of my project groups as projects, and I'm going to group it. Now, let me make sure you can still see what I'm doing. And then within here, I'm just going to say, let's use a base path. And the path that I'm going to use is groups API projects.php. So now if I do a quick root list, and I'm just going to grep for API. There we go. So you can see I've got that API projects in there, and currently it's not doing anything. So then we've got to think about adding our controller. Come down to our controllers. We've got API here, version 1, projects. So we want to version our API. We can wrap all of this in another prefix. Prefix that with a v1 as v1. Then we can just group it. Then just do a quick static closure here, which doesn't return anything, and drop that in there. So we do that again, we can see API v1 projects. Perfect. We've got where we want to go. And now we've got an index controller here. So what we want to do is just use that index controller. Index controller. Which one are we going for? This one, class. And that looks really long. So what we'll do is we'll grab this part here. And what I like to do is pull in that whole namespace of controllers API v1 projects. So back down here, if someone just randomly opens it, they see we go to the projects index. Now, if I did just pulled in the controller itself, this would get very busy. And all I see is index control of this, show control of that. And it would start to get, okay, so if I just randomly open this without paying attention, what is that index controller for? Pulling in that main namespace there allows me to kind of have a little bit more kind of visual context as I open it up. And I'm not getting any cognitive overload of, okay, I need to figure out where I am. And then we've got 20 of them up here that we've got to, click to open, find the right thing. It just gets really messy. So if you just pull in that main namespace, you can then get that index controller really nicely. At the minute, it does nothing. So let me quickly open Aspen. And what I want to do is do a quick request to do.test API v1 projects. 200 response, sorry. Absolutely fantastic. That's what we're looking for. We've got a good response time, 0 bytes returned. Excellent. Now, it's already appeared over here, and we can see that it's a fast load time, and everything is working as we would expect it to. This I will get into very shortly. This is the security audit that happens on every request. So within here, we know we're going to want to return a list of projects that belong to that user. So what we've got down here is an unauthenticated root, which it kind of sucks. You want to authenticate your API, no matter how silly it might be. I'm going to even take it further back than that. All the way up here, even your ping route, even your any single route that you might want to use, you want to make sure you put that auth around it, because you want to make sure no one's taking advantage of that in any way. And what I'm going to do, just to be even more mean, I'm going to say that I only want verified users to be able to access this, because anyone could come in. Maybe you haven't protected creating API tokens correctly, whatever that might be, but you want them to verify their identity before you let them loose with your API. So I've got the Treblle middleware going on, I've got the auth sanctum, and I've got verified. And this Treblle middleware, it just happens on the terminate request from the PHP FPM. So it's really out of the way and just gets executed eventually. So now if I come back to, I'm going to move this over here so we can see it better. Send that again. We're now going to get an issue. Well, we aren't sending the right headers. It thinks we want text HTML. So that's the first thing you got to think about. So we want to say, we only want to accept application JSON. So we say, okay, give me that. Oh, 401, unauthenticated. Perfect. I know what to do with that. So I can then come over to wherever that has gone. Here it is. I can say PHP Sussex, and I want to do all the stuff. So create that. Thank you. I'm going to copy you. Come back over to here, and I want to say that my authorization key is going to be bearer something or other. Send that again. And fantastic. We've now got an authenticated request. We're going in the right direction. And as you see, the difference between an unauthenticated request and an authenticated request is that you're exposing yourself to less risk. So now we can move on to what this controller is actually going to do. We want to get all of the projects that this user owns and return them. So what you could do is do this all in line and say project query where the user ID is equal to value, and we'll just say auth ID. And we'll just do a quick get request on that. And that's an API, right? If history has shown us anything, that works. We've got a list of API, and we've got an API endpoint. We can access the data, and it kind of works, right? But have you ever tried integrating with an API like this? It is terrible. There's just no thought. Like, you get this user ID. That's not super useful because I can only get my stuff. So why would I want that? Then you got created at and updated at. Great, you've given me a string as a timestamp. What can I do with that? So what you want to do is you want to think about how they're going to use your API. So we can say, let's make a resource. And we're going to say, prefix it with a v1 because we're versioning our API. So we're going to say, let's create a project resource. Fantastic. So now I can just take all of this big nasty query. I can grab that and I can say, let's say that my project resource is going to return a collection, and that resource that I'm going to pass through is this big old query that I had before. Perfect, right? It works. So I can come back and then I can send that request again, and it kind of does the same thing. But oh, look, now we've got this data column. Well, that's not very useful because if I'm using JavaScript, I'm going to say, okay, response data, 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 data. I mean, it's not an episode of Star Trek. You know, we don't need that many datas. So what we can do on this one is open up our app service provider and say, actually, while you're booting, what I want you to do is any kind of JSON resource, I just want to say without wrapping. And what I'll do is I'll just do a quick cleanup there, and we'll just fix that file because it's here's a good golden rule. Any file that you open and do anything to, leave it better than how you found it. Best bit of advice I could give you. So now I can send it again, and that data's disappeared. perfect. But it's also important to say something like, I don't know, should be strict. Do we want to enable this nasty eager loading N+1 problem that could appear? Probably not. So make sure you nip that in the bud and just say no. So now on our project resource, we can come over to this and say, fantastic. So let's just clean that up. This is going to return a new array. And what's it going to return? Well, it's going to need access to the project. And if you're like me, you like to see type hints everywhere, then you want to make sure that you do like this and say that this is going to have access to the resource, which is going to be the project in this instance. So that when I come down here and I say ID, I'm getting that type completion. So I can say this resource. Oh, look, I've got lots of stuff available because it's actually knowing what I'm after. So let's come back to this. We can send our request. And apparently I broke it. There we go. Send that again. And now we're getting a list of IDs. Great. That's useful. And you could do, you could follow JSON API specification. You could follow any specification that you find useful, but don't feel pressured to do so. Work with what's most comfortable for you. So then we can say, okay, so we want the name. That's kind of useful. The description's useful. Color's not so useful over the API. Order, parent, and user. Okay, so let's trigger that error now. So we can say our user is this resource user. I'm just going to say name. So if we send that, oh look, attribute user doesn't exist or wasn't retrieved. Okay, so what we actually want is the owner. So we can come back, send that again, and we're trying to lazy load stuff, which isn't good. So what we want to do is, okay, so we want to understand when a user's being requested. So we're going to have to rethink our query a little bit there, aren't we? So we can come back to our index controller, and what we're going to do, we're going to grab all of this, and we're just going to say, okay, so we're just going to say projects there. And then we're going to say projects is actually equal to this, but we want to make a few changes. So let's drop that, and we're going to get that later. So we can say something like projects get there. And we can say if request has include, we can do something like projects with, and this is going to be like some relations. So what we want to do, we want to implode join array elements with a string. No, we want to do explode. I always get those two mixed up. So we're going to say, okay, let's take anything that comes through with a comma and let's just grab it and see what we get. And we can just say request get include, but that's not what I like to do. I like to say, let's get the string value of this, cast it to a string, because that's what we need at this point. So we got a bit more type safety going on there. And let's just Laravel Python fix that one. And now if we come back to this, we're going to send it. And okay, so what happens if I say include the owner now? Suddenly it's given it to me. Fantastic. That's what I want. So we're getting our API in the right direction. We're monitoring the time it takes and the response size. So we've got 1.6 there. So what we want to do is say, okay, actually, we only want to use this when they're asking for it. So let's create a new resource, and we're going to create a user resource this time. So there's our user resource. And what we actually want to do is say the user is actually a new user resource. And the resource that we want to use is this when loaded. And we want to make sure that we're looking at the owner relationship. So only load this resource when it's asked for. So the size difference, we got 3 kilobytes there, or we've got 1.5 kilobytes there. So we're going in the right direction. We're thinking about the response size and the response time. We've got some headers, which is fantastic, but we can kind of do better, right? So one thing that I'm instantly thinking about on my index controller here is, well, surely I can cache some of this, right? I could probably go, my projects aren't going to change that often. So what I could probably do down here is say, I don't know, we could use a cache facade and say, we're just going to remember this forever. Or actually, no, we'll just remember it for now, because then we're going to get what we want back. So the key is going to be something like, I don't know, auth ID. Then we're going to say project. Fantastic. The TTL, let's say that long. And the callback is just going to be projects get, or projects get, sorry. So then that can be the cached value. And then what will happen is if that's not been called before, it will get it. Otherwise, it won't. So now we can just replace this for cached. So now if we come back here, we can send that. And we're getting 99 milliseconds. Now we're getting 36 milliseconds because it's been cached. Perfect. What more could we ask for? And that will stay cached for a little while. And suddenly our API is speeding up. So we're using Laravel's caching. But then, wait a minute. What happens when I create a new project? Do I have to wait for all of that to happen? No, you can come over to your model and come over to our project here. And what we have is a way to just break some of this stuff. So let's say we're going to use dispatched events. And we're going to say that when a project is created, we're going to call the project created class, which I will now create. So grab this and come down to models handlers, and I will create that now. We can say public function. We're going to receive a project. And what we want to do at this point is kind of do some cache busting, right? So we could dispatch a job to bust the cache, or we could do a million things to bust the cache. A lot of the models are going to want to do this. So let's create a job to make our lives a little bit easier, right? So we're going to create a support class here, and we're going to say support clear cache 4. So here we can just say, okay, so now let's dispatch a new clear cache 4, and the key is going to be the project user ID followed by _ projects. Fantastic. And that is all we need to do. So now we can click through to that one. Let's do a little bit of cleanup. This is going to accept a read-only string for the key. And that is that part done. And then down here, what we can actually do is just say, okay, so cache forget this key. Perfect. So we've got a way to clear the cache. When we create a project, things are going to happen. So at the minute, we've got some stuff in cache. This is returning really fast, 33 milliseconds. So if I come to here and just open a Tinker session, let's grab my user ID. I should be the first user, hopefully. So there we go, that's me. So now I can say app models project factory create, but I'm going to manually pass through that user ID quickly. So the user ID is going to be me. Fantastic. So now if I come back, if we pay attention to the 31 milliseconds there, it's now gone back up and gone back down because I've cleared the cache. I don't need to do anything. Things are running in the background. I've got my queues running. clear cache 4, fantastic. That is done. I know that job's running, and if I was using Laravel Horizon, I could have a dashboard that shows me that stuff, and I'm happy. So that's step 1. We're caching information. But this is starting to get a little bit ugly to work with, right? Like, this is a bit unpredictable. We're returning a resource. Now, we're building an API here, right? We don't want to return a resource. So let's move further along and let's say, okay, we want to actually create some responses here. We're going to create some V1 responses, and I'm going to have a collection response. Now, Laravel's got this really cool built-in trait that's called responsible. The thing that we're meant to be with our children. Now, this will return a response. I'm going to return a response here, but I'm going to return the Symfony response. And I'll mention why in a moment. So we want to add our constructor. And within here, this is our collection response. So we're going to say, okay, so we are going to have a private read-only anonymous resource collection as the data. Then down here, if you can hear that in the background, that is my autistic son having a bit of a moment, so I apologize. So the data is just this data. Now that's great. We can make this a read-only class, and we can tidy this up a little bit. Then in our index controller, what we actually want to do is we want to grab that and we want to say, actually, we're returning a new collection here. So let's make sure that we're a little bit more specific so that when we type hint, we know we're actually getting a response for a collection. Let's fix all of that. What is going on with this spacing today? So come back here. We can now send that again. It looks exactly the same. There's no performance penalty, same size, same time. Perfect. We've got a better API to work with. Now we're getting our projects. We're doing some includes. We're caching the data. And then we're returning a nice response. But it's not very declarative. You know, I want to know status codes. What happens if I'm returning a collection and I want to be able to change the status code? Okay, so we can say int status is going to be the response, HTTP, okay. So that's our default status. So then down here, we can say that our status is this status. And I'm a little bit more appeased. It's a little bit more approved by Steve. I'm happy. I don't need, you know, I could probably say something like response here. And if you're in a bit of a funny mood, you can say, you could probably do, I'm a teapot. And you can send that response back. And we're getting a 418. So the server refuses to attempt to brew coffee with a teapot. But in reality, this is just going to be a HTTP, okay, right now. So when we send that, we're getting that 200, but we don't actually need to pass that through because that is the default. So where else could we go with this? Well, we could do some caching, some kind of response caching, but Laravel's got, if I'm honest, pretty bad kind of support for doing that manually. It gets a little bit messy. So you need to look at a package, and that's kind of outside the scope of this talk because we're talking about the built-in tools here, right? We want to look at what tools has Laravel got built in that's going to help you build a better API. Well, we've got caching. We can work with a request quite nicely. We can build responses. That makes sense. And we've got our resource collections. So what I also like to do is create a factory in here. So we can say factories, and I like to create a header factory. So we can come here and we can say, we're going to create a header factory, and we're going to have a public static function, a default. This is going to return an array of headers, basically. So the content type won't be that. It will be application JSON. Maybe we want to enforce and accept on there as well. So we can come over to this and we can say, actually, headers, we're going to use that header factory and pull in those defaults there. So maybe we need to add custom headers. So X my header equals oops. Yeah, maybe we want to do that sort of thing. Maybe we've got custom headers we need to set for one reason or another. And X my header. Oops, fantastic. You can see I've got my treble trace ID already in there, so I know that's going to work. X powered by is in there, great. So let's come and view this last request. The headers that we've got back. We've got my headers coming back as an oops, treble trace, fantastic. But then let's look at the security audit here. We're not actually rate limiting at this point. So, okay, fair point. Maybe I should be rate limiting. So then I can come up to here and we can say, I want to throttle by default 60 requests a minute. That's built in. Fantastic. I can do that. So I can send lots of requests, keep clicking until I get a failure. Come on. Come on. All those years of playing computer games don't fail me now. I don't think. There we go. Too many attempts. So we're getting there. Too many attempts. Users has sent too many requests for a given amount of time. Fantastic. So we know it works. So then if we come back to here and we go, oh, we get 429 there. We get 429. We can see that we've made a few more requests, 97 in fact. So if we could quickly come and view this, we can say that with no parameters, too many attempts. Here's a payload that was given. That was an error. Okay, but now our rate limiting is passing. Perfect. Mime sniffing. Okay, so we don't want people to be able to sniff our mimes, right? That sounds a bit weird. We don't want them to do that. So let's add a new header. So we're going to add that X content type options, and we're going to say, okay, so sorry, Mr. French person, don't sniff me. We'll send that again, and great. Come back here, and now we're getting requests again. We can come back down. We can see mime sniffing. Ooh. Is that even showing? X content type options. That should be being picked up. It's not for some reason. I will move on from that one. Forcing a secure connection. So we can do like restrict transport here. And I've actually built a package for this. It'll feel like cheating. I'm pretty sure that accepts true or something. So send that. Come back. And our latest one was 45 seconds ago. 2 seconds ago, here it goes. It comes in. We're getting mime sniffing still ignored. Force secure connection. Fantastic. Okay, so we want to stop people trying to embed our API. So we can take it a step further with some security. So we can say, okay, so I'm pretty sure that one says just deny. Deny any sort of embeds. I won't keep doing this back and forward. Security policies. So CSP, I don't find it that useful. You can do it, but that's up to you. And then this allow header. So when it comes to the allow header, you kind of got to do a little bit of juggling. Wait for that request to come in. It's got to go through an ETL process. And there we go. So now we've got embed prevention, content type specification. We're doing good. Method limiting. So we want a little bit of middleware here, right? And Laravel supports it out of the box. So I can say, hey, make some middleware. And we're going to say method limit middleware. Perfect. Let's go ahead and open that one. Method limit middleware. And what this is going to do is we're going to be able to understand what route we are getting. So let's just do a quick dive dump on that request route. Does that take arguments? Yes and no. Perfect. So let's come back to here. And what we could probably do is just inline this. So we could say method limit middleware class for now, just so that we've got it. Send that request and we're getting something back. So we've got a route methods, get and head. So what we can actually do with this one is, okay, so in this method limiting middleware, what we can actually do is protect. There we go, methods. That's what we want. So we can actually protect our API really easily here. So before it even does anything, let's do a request headers. Is it on the request or is it on the response? We'll do it on the response. So let's say that our response is equal to that. That's going to give us a response, and eventually we're going to return that response. So up here, what we want to do is say that the response headers, we're going to have to do some type hints in here. And this should be a illuminate response. Headers, I should be able to set. The key that I want to set is allow, and the values is going to be, we should be able to just implode that. This is complaining. Why is it complaining? Fix it. Cool. And then replace yes. If it's already been set, I want to replace it within this middleware. Perfect. Now just return the response. So now if I send this request again, if I come down to the headers, I should have an allow header somewhere. Allow, get and head. Perfect. So now if I come back, that was received 8 seconds ago, I can come back down and I can see now that I'm limiting based on that as well. So I know that from a security perspective, my API is going in the right direction. I know my response size is 1.76 kilobytes. I could probably shrink that a little bit by using some kind of content encoding as well, which is great. I can configure my server to do that, and that will shrink that massively. The response time is relatively good, but what I'd need to do to improve that is use something like Laravel Octane. So I can make my API fast. I can make it secure. I can protect it using middleware. I'm able to cache and query my data a lot quicker using Laravel's built-in caching. I can make my API a little bit more responsive by using the request has and then building things up maybe a little bit more sensibly. And suddenly my API is getting a lot easier to work with. Now, this is kind of like the long way around to do it. And what I would typically do at this point is say, scratch that, use a different package. And this is where we're diverging a little bit, but we'd use sparsely Laravel query builder package. And it's, you don't need it, but it saves so much hassle. You don't need to do lots of this because, okay, what about request filtering, request sorting? And it just gets a little bit messy. So what we want to do instead is say, okay, so projects is going to be the query builder for project class allow. We want to allow includes, and the include we want to allow is going to be the owner. Okay, we're also going to want to say something like, okay, let's allow filtering on the project as well, and we might want to filter by, I don't know, color, random one I know. So filters, let's filter by color. Realistically, you would pick something else. Okay, so we're going to allow sorts, and we're going to basically sort based on the created app. Fantastic. So let's get that eloquent builder back, and then let's say where the column user ID is equal to auth ID. So there's our projects again. We can now remove that one. We can now remove that and make it a little bit cleaner. We're still going to do this cache part here, but it means that the way that we're working with our API and that API experience is a little bit nicer. So now I can say, actually, I want to include the owner. Include equals owner. It's not including it. Includes. I did notice this recently on the latest release of the package that it doesn't work as well as it used to. So maybe it's time I stopped telling you to use this package. So let's also say, okay, we want to filter based on the color equals, I don't know, orange. Send the request. You should filter to a few. Okay, so maybe we want to filter to blue, and it looks like this package has stopped working, or I'm hitting the cache again, aren't I? I'm hitting the cache. So you've got to think about how you cache these things when you start to get towards JSON API, because what we're getting here is, if we just do a quick die and dump, let's do a die and dump on request all. So now if we do that now, we got filter color. So what we need to do is start to think about how we might build that up. For now, I'm just going to drop the cache and say, would use response cache at that point and just manage an e-tag header and go for it that way. So there we go. There's none that are blue. Let's look at white. So, okay, so how about we just include the owner? Now we've got that owner in there as well. So there's ways for us to improve our API. And the built-in tools get us so far. And we can scale our API to a certain point without having to reach for a package. There's a common theme in the Laravel community to just, there's a package for that. Sparsy's built that. Don't worry about it. We'll just install it. And then before you know it, you don't know how half of your application works or half of your API works, because it's hidden behind this abstraction of a package that's wrapping part of Laravel's functionality that you don't quite understand. So you just install it, use it, and hope they don't break it. So that's a few little tips on building an API. And obviously, what you can then do is when you move on to things such as creating a new project, for example, down here, start to use form requests. So store request for a project. That means that this is going to be resolved from the container before it hits your controller, and it's going to validate the request for you. It's going to validate that the color is actually an enum that has been listed in this random enum that I created. That the order is a number, that the parent ID, if it exists, if it's passed, then the parent ID actually exists already on the database. The description is a string if it's been passed through, and that the name is what you need it to be. It'll pre-validate all of that for you. And then you can start to dispatch that background job, because typically what you see when you're working with an API is that it's probably an SPA or something that's got an internal state management that's interacting with your API. And they're going, okay, I'm getting my user's data. I'm going to send it to your API, but I'm not going to wait for your response. I'm going to take that data. I'm going to push it to my local state. And then the next time I need that data, you've probably got it for me already. So I'll just refetch it when I need it. So they'll push that to their local state, which means you don't actually need to do it synchronously and return that new resource to them for them to go, oh, great, I've got everything that I need, because the likelihood is they're going to do a request in the next 5 minutes to get that list again, in which case your asynchronous job has already ran and they'll be getting that on that next round trip. So save yourself those bytes and save yourself that I've got to get this done now and I've got to make this more performant because my writes are slow. just push it to the background and return a response. And suddenly your API will be snappier, faster, more fun to work with, and it will make your life so much easier. So that is I suppose, a whirlwind tour of kind of building scalable APIs with built-in tools. And is it doing everything? It is. Thank you for listening. And because this is remote, we're going to do an interesting way to do Q&A. So I will hand this back over to the team over at PHP Sussex, and let's figure out how we can do some Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Super interesting stuff. Really good overview of what's available in Laravel. I really loved it. And
Good.
I'm also always super impressed by people who can live code while doing a presentation like that. That's not something I do. So yeah, well done.
Of a live code, more of a live rant with a keyboard, so it's all good.
Yeah, but you still manage to get from A to B, which is, I think it's a great skill. Quick question for you then. So say somebody is new to Laravel. Would you recommend that they only use built-in tools to build their API, or do you think they should maybe reach out to those packages that help?
Straight away? I think to start with, you need to understand what the packages are doing. Much like, if you remember back to when you were learning programming and you were trying to build your first web app, you didn't. Well, I know I didn't. I didn't just reach for this framework that's going to do half the job for me, because I wanted to know what it was doing. You need to understand what that abstraction is doing so that you can best utilize it. Is there a third or fourth argument, or is there a separate method call that you could use that's going to do the job better, faster, more securely, that you don't know about because you've just gone compose or require? Not my problem. So I definitely think figure out how to do it with the framework. And if you hit a wall, there's no shame in that. Use a package. Just make sure you use that IDE click through to try and understand what that package is actually doing for you. And is there a different way that you can maybe use a package so that you can utilize it better? Because what's in the docs isn't always the best way to do it. It's the most generic way to follow usage of this package. So if you are going to use a package, understand that package and see if there's a better way for you to use it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And also maybe sometimes people don't realize how far they can go with the built-in tools already. Yeah. Cool. Are there any questions? Yep, over there.
Cheers, thank you very much. So I don't know if the camera can see me. I'm still on the Alex somehow. Oh, there we go. There you go. Not that I really want to see myself in the camera, actually. It's not just a vanity thing. Yeah, thank you for that talk. It was really interesting. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on GraphQL. So this is obviously a heavily REST API sort of talk. Yes. A lot of the SPAs, PWAs want to, use GraphQL because they want to, I guess, be in a bit more control about how they receive the data back to them. But what are your thoughts on, I guess, REST versus GraphQL generically, but also with Laravel and how well you can implement the same kind of security and performance in Laravel for GraphQL?
Well, when it comes to GraphQL and Laravel, there's one package that's good, which is the Lighthouse PHP package, and it allows you to define your schema, add authorization gates, and do some tight-knit control that you could do with your Laravel code, but within the schema. And it's good, but at the end of the day, obviously I'm a REST man. I build REST APIs, and I think REST APIs are the way you should be building it. And GraphQL is really just a query language for building a complicated form on your back end, right? Just asking for the data in a specific way. It's an advanced search field. That's what GraphQL is. But it's good. And if you're building an application that has got the requirements that were around when GraphQL was created by Facebook or Meta now, in that you're building a mobile application where the network is super poor, and that every bytes or kilobytes of response size and request size matters, then yeah, GraphQL is probably perfect for you. But then you're sending, instead of sending a URL, everything's a post request. And what you're kind of making up for in that response size coming back, you're actually increasing the request size that you're sending by always including this massive payload of data to specify exactly what you want, which could have been done through the URL with a real REST API by using something like JSON API to filter, to sort, to include columns, to include relationships, to hide specific columns. All of that can be done in the URL, but it's harder to do that from the client side. So
would you rather use like your example using includes and nested data in just a REST API? I guess the REST evangelists might say actually you shouldn't go down that route, and it should be a more Hatios kind of separate API thing for that. I guess that's the counter of that.
Yeah, exactly. And if I was going to go full JSON API, then when I'm including the owner of that project, like I did, I'd only get a small bit of data back. I'd get, okay, so here's the ID of that resource. Here's what that type of resource is. And here's a Hatios link to go get that information when you need it.
Okay.
So that's what I would typically do. But doing that in Laravel without any packages you end up with 70, 80 lines of code just to try and achieve it. And then you've got to tweak it for each change, and it's just not worth the hassle. So typically I'd use a package for that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Also, if you are watching this online on YouTube, you can use the chat box to ask questions.
I really like the security thing where it's looking at the headers and going, okay, you pass on that.
Yeah.
For the rate limiting, I noticed there weren't any headers added. Was that being triggered as a pass because loaded 200s came through and then it was a 429, or the middleware that you've added recognized there was a rate limit, or is there some other heuristic thing going?
Yeah, the Laravel middleware will add the headers to the response. So it will tell the client how many requests are left that you can make within a certain time frame, whether you've hit the limit or not. And what the tool was doing was just detecting those headers and saying, I've detected that you're rate limiting.
Gotcha. So there's more, the middleware's doing more than just counting up internally. It's actually adding some stuff to response. Gotcha.
Yeah, it's basically maintaining that state through headers so that rate limits aren't exceeded.
Thank you.
No problems. And respect for the beard.
Anybody else? Do we have questions online? Maybe no. Might have a last one for you. I'm going to take the opposite angle of my first question. Are there any packages that you basically use from the get-go because you know you're going to need it anyway, or them, that you would recommend?
So many. Like in a typical API that I'm building, I would probably use something like Sparsy Laravel Query Builder because it just makes building a JSON API compliant API even easier. Then Tim McDonald created a JSON API resource that is super easy to use. It's very developer friendly, and it will just do it for you. You create your resources, you tell it what it's related to, and it will just kind of load it in when it's needed. There's a couple of packages that I've built that I always pull in to allow me to kind of have some kind of developer friendliness in my code while I'm looking at it. It's less about it's going to make my API better. It's more about it's going to make building my API easier for me. So I've got response a response class package, an error package, so that I can return consistent errors. I've got a status code enum that I pull in so that I can just kind of use that quicker instead of pulling in the Symfony response class, which has got the status codes and then some. So I just got a nice clean enum that I can use. That's it. A lot of the time, I just lean heavily on the framework in my own way by pulling it instead of. I don't typically use facades. I did in this demo because it's quicker and easier. But typically, what I'd do, I wouldn't use a cache facade. I'd use a cache manager. I'd use dependency injection to pull that in and just call it as I need it, because all that facade is really doing is checking the container for a built instance and either returning it or building an instance to return to you. So instead of doing those little shortcuts which look cool in screenshots, I would actually, okay, let's inject it. Let's inject that. Let's maybe create that service class so that I can manage things separately around my app nicer, because I know I'm going to want to be able to get a list of projects in this part of my app, as well as this part of the API, as well as this maybe command line, so that I'd start to split out the code a little bit better.
Yeah, that makes sense. Talking about consistency, and you mentioned JSON API, like the specification earlier. Is that something that you would recommend using, or is it something you recommend using maybe when you reach a certain point with your API? What's your position on that?
I'm a firm believer of API standards are absolutely fantastic, but don't just blindly follow them because you feel you have to. What you want to do is make sure you're designing your API in a way that's going to be efficient for the people that are using it. And if that's JSON API, then fantastic. If it's HAL, great. If it's JSON LD, perfect. Whatever it might be, even if it's your own baked standard that isn't documented, but it's known internally with internal documentation, as long as you're consistent and you're following a standard, even if it's the most basic standard, that's better than blindly following JSON API because you heard some bold guy on YouTube tell you should do.
And there are a lot of bold guys on YouTube telling you to do stuff, yes.
There's a lot of us, and we've usually got beards.
Yes. All right. Are there any other questions? Still nothing online. All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up here then. Please, let's get another round of applause for Steve. Thanks again, mate.
Thanks for having me. And I apologize again that I couldn't be there in person.
No worries, mate. And I hope we'll be able to meet in person soon.
Yes, I hope so too.
Thanks, mate. Take care.
Thanks.
All right. I'm not sure I've got much more to tell you, actually, because Charlie did everything earlier, which is great. So yeah, thanks everybody for coming. Thanks again to Steve. Thanks again to Silicon Brighton and Runway East for their support. I think there are a couple of slices of pizza left and some beers and drinks, whatever. So if you want to stay for a bit longer, you're very welcome to. But if not, yeah, thanks again for coming, and hopefully see you next time. Cheers.